We can have moving in the park access control. We can have exceptions to the rule. That's okay. It's allowed. We can still enforce our law. We've never had an additional special permit for some reason that we enforce it ourselves. I don't think we will necessarily. I met with Brad. I want to have the city apply, have staff review it. But we do coordinate those things, internally. And that very much helps the country. So like, we're covering those things, but it's not an official application, but we do need to should we make an official application in the future and have control of what goes through that process. I think that it would do. But again, we cover ourselves by doing all of the things that the permit requires, but we've into it. It's always been internal. So that's the lesson learned here. We are going through what's really a standard operating procedure, but we've never had it for anybody else. It's always just been internally. So that's the element. I know it feels frustrating.
Well, I mean, I know that we're still kind of.
If we were to do it again,
Our age grade have, yeah, like 4 or 5.
well, they would need to be permitted.
They can be licensed anywhere. They have that.
But do we, does the event organizer, the license pay for the $30 per each truck?
They can.
You could have that on those food trucks if you want.
And a lot of times if you're not charging that truck, you can
Pay for your own. There's some of them that charge trucks to come, it goes to the event, but also.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Do we get insurance policies out of the city?
We have, there's
Not that used, right?
the only, not for these right now. For the, it's really, for Country Fair, it's just a parade that we have to have a special one. As part of the state parade permit, or the special. We have it. It's a conversation we should have. Yeah. Sure.
We had probably twice as much call coming out of that pit.
Well, there's a lot more work that's happening there.
That's what I'm saying.
I asked them specifically recently about the amount of excavation and whatnot that's taking place, and they said, we're not excavating at a higher rate necessarily, but there's a lot of material that they've already excavated that is going out to projects.
Because, I mean, they have the double dump all truck.
Yeah, they have a lot coming out of there right
Yeah,
now.
I mean, I follow them all the time.
Yeah.
But, you know, I'll bet you that's one of the things, literally, that's moving the material, put it into the dump is. What's the board? They're saying anymore.
Yeah. No Quinn, did it?
They won't.
Don't forget your frame. Yes, sure. I never look, so that's why I forewarn
Welcome.
you. Mhm.
After, fully recovered.
Slow down, sir.
Sorry.
Welcome, everybody. This is our council work session. And September 21st. Oh, thank you. I couldn't tell the difference. Okay, 2021, it's 6:02 PM. And all council members are in attendance with the exception of Councilman Soderquist. We will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I will give that, and then we'll have a prayer by Councilwoman Alberts. Please stand. Please repeat after me. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our dear kind Father in heaven, we are so very grateful to be able to meet together this night and discuss the needs of our city. We pray that thy spirit will be upon us, that we will be able to think about these decisions, the long-term planning of them, and the options that would be the best solutions for our residents. We pray that we will be able to have a good discussion and hear different points of view, and pray for thy hand of safety to be upon us when this meeting is over. We're still very grateful, Father, for all those in our community, and pray for those that are ill at this time. And also ask a special blessing to be upon all of our emergency personnel, that they will be kept safe from harm, and that they will still have our gratitude for them and their acts of service to us in this city. And we give you thanks in Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Councilwoman Alberts. All right, we're here this evening to talk about fiber network options. So South Weaver City has researched options related to potential additional options for high-speed broadband for the community. A request for information, or RFI, for fiber to the premises, FTTP, was published in June. 6 companies responded to the city's request, including Comcast, Connex, EntryPoint, Strata Networks, Syringa, and Utopia. On August 6th, the Municipal Utilities Committee's members met to discuss the information and begin preparation for a full council discussion. The information provided in your packet is a collaborative effort of the committee. And I will turn the time over now to Dave to elaborate.
Thank you, Mayor. We have prepared a set of slides to provide some additional background above and beyond what was provided in the packet. I know that the council has had a chance to look at that, and ultimately there is it's a fundamental philosophical question that we'll want to tackle as a group. But before that, the Municipal Utilities Committee has asked me to provide some additional background and summary based on the conversations that we've had and the research that's been done over an extended period of time. So my goal is to just kind of tee up this conversation and then let you have at it as a council to guide this community. One thing that is important to know that we put this RFI out there as a fiber to the premises. Fiber is one option for high-speed broadband. There are other physical infrastructure type ways to provide high-speed internet. And we have looked at all of those types of things, and high-speed broadband options are included. But this was titled fiber to the premises, as the RFI was also titled fiber to the premises. But the overarching idea is that
high-speed broadband, high-speed internet to the community. Not changing slides. It is on. Do you mind? Oh. Do you mind just moving that forward then?
But it's not on ours.
Well, let me let me start with this. I want to just provide a little bit of background to the network options. Fiber network is, when we say that, we're describing the actual physical cables that run fiber optics to the city or throughout the city. Once there is a network that is there and there's actual physical cables that deliver that, everybody would need an internet service provider or an ISP to actually connect to the internet from their home or place of business. And so when we talk about the fiber network, we're talking about the infrastructure portion for the main part, but there's also the ISP portion as well. Some of the options that we are presenting or talking about, the company does both. They are both the network and the ISP, but most of them provide the network and allow an open network for all kinds of internet service providers to then provide the service on that network. So the mayor said it, but we put out the RFP. We received those 6 options or 6 responses. And then in the packet, you can see a general summary. And I want to spend a little bit of time on that summary table. You'll notice that one of the first columns after the title is ownership. That's an important piece that I'd like to provide just a little background to. We say in there city ownership or company ownership. What that means is who actually owns and has to maintain the physical infrastructure, those fiber, the fiber infrastructure in the ground. Who owns that? Ownership also implies an element of risk and reward. When you own it and you operate it, then you take on the risk of making sure it's successful, and you reap the benefits if it is wildly successful. But you also have the risk if it's not successful, that you have to take that on. And so that ownership piece is a really important piece. And there are options for the city to own the network and operate it itself, or the city to own the network and hire somebody to operate it and maintain it, contract with somebody, or for the city to not own it at all and just have the companies own and operate and maintain the network. There's also an opportunity there. You'll notice that Utopia, as one of the responses, they're a little bit unique. They're not a, yeah, next slide. One more. Utopia is actually an intergovernmental agency. So they essentially act as the city. So they are their own separate entity. And if the city were to go with that option, Utopia takes ownership. The city doesn't own it themselves, but Utopia acts on behalf of the city as an owner, if that makes sense. It's a little nuanced, but the reason we said company is because it's not the city owning and operating and having the risk and reward. That is all transferred over to Utopia, essentially. So that's the nuance there with that company intergovernmental entity explanation. The other portion of this slide that I think needs a little bit of attention is the column under city obligation. There are various ways that the city potentially would be obligated here. Of course, if the city wanted to own the network, maintain it, operate it all itself, and have nobody else involved, then we're looking at all of the city obligation to finance the infrastructure, the capital, to put that in the ground, then also the operation and maintenance ongoing. A couple of these options show as a maybe. because those companies said that they can provide the service or they could have us do it. It's a maybe because depending on the option or the philosophy the city picks, they could potentially be an option and it would have a city obligation in the form of financial contribution or other obligation, or they could take that on if that was the relationship the city wanted with them. So they had options within their own company that did or did not have the city obligated financially. The yes and the no's, I think, are straightforward. The maybe, like I said, is based on the options. But the one, again, Utopia is a little bit of an outlier. They're a little bit unique in that they provide this idea of a take rate. And the obligation from the city is a little bit different with them. So I'll describe what it is not. With some of the other companies, if the city owns it, then the city would bond directly in order to get the money needed to put in the fiber, right? That would be just a direct bond the city would go out to market with and have to do that to come up with the money. Utopia, on the other hand, is a little bit different where the city does not bond directly. Utopia would be the bonding agency. However, the city would be obligated to backstop that bond, meaning the city's bonding power acts as the secondary payment option, the backstop of that bond. And the take rate, as described in their request for information response, is the break-even point where the city would not have to provide any financial support. If it was above that take rate, and take rate means the number of homes and businesses that subscribed to the service. If it is above 34.4% of what the city is right now today, then there would be no city money that would go toward the project. If the take rate is underneath that, at any point during the life of the bond, which would be 27 years in that case, then the city would have financial obligation there. So essentially that obligation is we would be on the hook if there's not enough subscribers, to say it that way. Question, comment?
And the city would have the first 2 years to get that take rate up to or beyond 34%.
Correct.
It doesn't have to happen day one.
Correct.
But we have to maintain 34% the entire duration of the bond.
Yes. And any new homes or businesses that are built that come in the future as part of growth to the city, that doesn't increase the percentage. That all would go toward the 34%. So they would calculate what the 34% is right now, and then any growth to the city, it doesn't change the 34%. That will, if any signed up as part of that, it would go toward that 34% to meet that obligation. So again, it's a backstop obligation instead of the direct obligation. However, I will point out with that backstop idea that it would show up on the city's financial books. It would be clear that we are the secondary payer and not the primary payer, but it would count toward our bonding capacity. So it would be on the books as an obligation because we're essentially co-writing or co-signing. We're of a car payment in essence, to use that analogy, that yes, we would be on the hook if the primary payer doesn't pay, and the primary payer would be subscribers at 34.4%.
So if my math is right, we have about 2,200 residences, I think, so about 770 would be about 35%. Does that sound about right?
That sounds about right.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Questions on this general summary of the responses?
Yes, why are there no project costs on some of them?
They were not included in the RFI. They didn't put a specific number to it.
They just didn't provide it.
Okay, thank you.
The schedule, to point that out, that is what they proposed as far as having all of the infrastructure in place. It would be a project timeline to have of 1 year, 2 years, 3 years to have the infrastructure laid throughout the city.
The other thing that's not in here they didn't provide was the actual hookup fee for each service. The fees that are in this spreadsheet are just the monthly cost for the service, but there's actually an additional hookup fee, and that varies from company to company as well.
Yes. So ultimately, the Municipal Utilities Committee felt as we went through this, there was not a good way to recommend one of those companies to work with or one of those options to select, because it was very dependent on certain key questions. And as we talked through it, we realized that that those key questions really would hinge and pivot the conversation and open up the doors of possibility depending on what the city really values and what the city really wants. And so with that, let's go to the next slide. Those main key questions, again pointed out in the packet, are: should the city facilitate FTTP to all members of the community? And then if that's a yes to some degree, then should the service be delivered using a subscriber model or a utility model? I want to hopefully paint a little bit of a picture before asking those questions and having a discussion about them. What does it mean for the city to facilitate or not facilitate? What does a subscriber model look like versus a utility model? So again, just a little bit of background, and then I will back off. Let's go to the next slide. There were three main kind of thought questions under the idea of should the city facilitate. The first one is high-speed internet something that everyone should have access to in South Weber? A yes or no to that question leads you to certain options that are presented in front of you, or remove certain options that are in front of you. Some key considerations with that idea is, right now, the city as a governmental entity is not a player in this world, right? We've left that up to private business to provide high-speed internet. It is a private enterprise. And the question is, are they doing a good enough job? Are we getting enough options in the city? Do we need additional options? If so, does the city need to step in and do something? Or should that be left up to private business? Or is it some public-private partnership that would need to do that? Again, does the city need to step in to make something happen, or are we okay the way we are? Another consideration or thought question is, what's the proper role of the city in this? Again, should the city engage in this and get involved or not is kind of the key question of should the city facilitate. If the city feels like this is a governmental role, if public needs to get involved in order to make this happen for our residents, then are we willing to obligate ourselves, and to what degree? Those are kind of the key philosophical questions or thought questions around should the city get involved or should the city not get involved. Next slide. A little information or example about subscriber model versus utility model. The subscriber model is the idea that only those who subscribe and sign up get two things. They get to pay, but they also get to receive the service. Whereas a utility model is there is a connection point or an access point for everybody as a general utility. So everybody pays at some level, but then subscribers would pay for a higher level of service or an additional level of service. So everybody pays for the service to some level with utility. A couple of examples of that, Providence City recently up in Cache Valley went with a city-owned, city direct bond utility model, where every member of the city on their utility bill paid a small fee to make sure that fiber was accessible to everybody. It also came with a low level of internet service, internet access, a low speed. But if people wanted to subscribe to a higher speed, they could. So again, everybody was involved because it was a utility model. I know recently, for those that have been following, Kaysville City had a conversation like that, whether they should do a utility model or not. They were looking at utility model. Again, it was, do we want to own it or do we not want to own it? The risk reward. Ultimately, they went back and forth and put it to the vote of the people, and the citizenry came back. It was, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was 50.2 to 48.8 or 49.8. It was really close. And ultimately, the vote was to not have the city do a utility model. And then, of course, Utopia is more of the subscriber model. Not everybody has to pay for it, but again, the city has that backstop obligation. So, not to point them out directly, the other options, the other companies provide options with the utility or subscriber model. They have those options within their portfolios essentially. So, one more slide. When we first started down this road, I don't remember the exact timeline. It's been a couple years, at least a year and a half. We did a broadband survey throughout the community. And one of the questions that we asked was, are you supportive of the city building a fiber to the home network if it can be paid for only by those that voluntarily sign up for services? In other words, no taxes or fees for non-subscribers. And this kind of answers that question of, is the city interested in a subscriber model versus a utility model? We didn't ask it in those terms. We didn't ask the follow-up question, are you supportive if they did a utility model? But there was overwhelming support of the 260 respondents there, 261. 90% said that they supported that idea of a subscriber model to pay for it and the city being involved that way. With that, last slide is turning that back over to those main questions, which again, kind of lead us down a path of which options to select based on which philosophy we feel is important. So that's the additional background that the committee asked me to provide, and I will turn that back over to the committee for any additional thoughts or ideas before the discussion.
I'll let you go first, Wayne.
All right, thanks to staff and the committee to help put all this information together. We do have Brandon Jones here, who is our technical guru. So if you want some specific questions of the RFIs, of the how are they going to do that, he's supposed to be stand ready to be able to answer those technical questions. But in essence, Dave did a great job in encapsulating what's before us today. We have some options. I don't think, in my opinion, we need to make a decision today as a council, but I think it's an opportunity for the council to ask questions of the committee or staff to help them make a decision. But I think the next step after this would be to engage the public. And that would be one of our final discussion points, is how then do we engage the public to give us their opinion to help us make the decision more along the lines of utility or subscriber model. I'm of the opinion that I think the city does need to have other options, that the current option, not everyone in the city is able to get a cable service. They have to use wireless service for their broadband internet. And those who do have the cable service are not happy either with the cost or that service. So I believe the community that I've heard suggests we want another option. How we go about the next option is part of today's discussion.
Yeah, and I mean, along the same lines with Wayne, I mean, it was, once we got all this information, we felt like we were spinning our wheels if we didn't have a basis for what are we willing to do as a city? What are we willing to do as a council? Do we want to, I mean, that first question was, what's the basic thing? Do we feel that we should be providing a high-speed option for everybody in the city? And then obviously that next question drastically changes. If that's a no, we just drop it. But if it's a yes, then we go down in the road of trying to figure out what that is. I mean, most of you probably know my opinion. I do think we can help facilitate it. I struggle with doing a city-owned, city-type thing. But again, first we need to decide if we should even facilitate that. And I think that's a pretty simple question, but because there's lots of ways to facilitate it without obligating the city financially too, by lots of different ways. I don't know if some of you may not be familiar with that, but you can sign franchise agreements where certain companies come in and they just have that right to run the utilities and do all that, and it's all a free market system. And it's whether we do that or it's more of a push. Go ahead, Dave.
I just wanted to add one layer to this that I didn't say. We talked about risk reward But one of the ideas that we were able to recognize as we looked at all of these options and these responses was this idea of, if we just let the free market system do it, what does that look like in our city? So far, we know what it's looking like today, but based on the options in front of us, it was described in those RFIs that ultimately those companies would choose which areas of the city they would run fiber to based on what makes them money, right? That's why they're in business. And so they would select areas of the city. So some of that question that we're asking of, should we provide to all, that all is a key word
It is.
that helps us. So I didn't mean to take over.
No, you're good. I mean, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but even the ones who were choosing to go into certain areas, they were eventually committed to cover most of the city, if not all of the city, even on the free market style.
I think we had the option to pursue that, right? And try to push that.
And that's kind of what I thought. But anyway, so I guess that's really the main focus, so that the committee and staff had a direction to go. But if we want, I mean, I don't know, Wayne's suggesting we, get a lot of public input. I mean, I think if everybody's saying no, we shouldn't even help facilitate it, it's going to be a dead issue, and we don't even need the public input. But if we all feel that we need to help facilitate, then we need public input on how that gets facilitated. So, because it definitely changes the course we go down. That's all I have.
Okay, so perhaps that's something we can decide tonight, Haley or Angie. Can I say those names in the work session?
Yeah, for sure.
Do you have an opinion on these, if you think the city should facilitate and be
So,
to some degree?
so my biggest question that I have is how, I'm trying to think of the best way to word this. If we invest in this, how long will the city be able to get benefit from the fiber internet? Is it going to be something we get 5 years and then new technology comes out and now we've invested millions of dollars in technology that's not very useful? Does anyone have a crystal ball?
All I can say is what has been said to me from some of these companies. And before we ever did the RFI, the committee actually met with some of these companies directly and were able to have some conversations. So that's where I draw some of this from, as well as conferences I've attended and other places that has had that exact same question. With 5G coming out, what does that look like? When 6G comes out, what does that look like? Are we obligating ourselves to a delivery method that may become obsolete? What I've been told is, yes, there are always going to be new technologies. Speed is always, there's a cap on speed, and speed is capped at the speed of light. And fiber optics will always be that speed. And one of the things that has been described is all of those other wireless options or whatnot have a backbone of fiber in order to provide those. And so the fiber is what is relied on now. And again, crystal ball, my understanding is it will be relied upon in the future. But those other options maybe provide other benefits than being tied to fiber, where fiber would provide certain reliability or certain consistency that the others might not have, but they may be able to provide benefits wirelessly that fiber doesn't. And so I think it's kind of a trade-off. My personal view based on those conversations, and again, it's a personal view, it's not industry standard or anything like that, is that fiber will always be part of the equation. And by having fiber directly to homes, I don't think you're going to end up with a faster speed doing something else. You would have other things, other benefits maybe than being hardwired into the ground, but I don't see anything replacing fiber necessarily. Again, personal feeling.
So maybe a way that we could kind of compare this would be phone lines. landlines and the fact that, landlines effectively have had new technology come in and out, but ultimately, phone lines are more reliable than a cell phone in the fact that if service goes down or whatnot, you're going to have your phone lines still working. You're still going to have those lines clear. But we have other options available to us outside of those phone lines. It's just a matter of how much we want to invest in the city to have that reliability. Is that kind of a good
I think that's well
way
said.
to see it? Okay. And I just had a question on the infrastructure. So if I wasn't really quite clear on that portion of it, whether the city is ownership of it or the company, but whoever it is, they are taking care of the infrastructure for life on it? Or is there like an expiration date on when they stop taking infrastructure care of it?
So again, there's kind of options within that idea. Anywhere from the city chooses to own and operate and maintain all of it, right? So it's all of our obligation, down to the other side where the city's not involved in all, and the companies are doing everything. They're on the hook for putting in the fiber, they're on the hook for maintaining it and all of that. Or it could be somewhere in the middle where the city wants to own it, but we contract with somebody to maintain it, right? We don't have staff that are network experts, and so we could hire a company to do that. I do know of cities recently that have directly bonded because they wanted to own it, but then they contracted with, for example, Strata as one of the respondents to our RFI, to be the operator of it. And so it can vary depending on what we value.
There's a phrase in the industry, OOMR&R, own, operate, maintain, repair, and replace. And typically those who are building it, the infrastructure, they are the owners, and they can be the operator, or they could subcontract out operation to someone else. They can maintain it themselves, or they could subcontract the maintenance out, but the responsibility lies with them who own it. If that makes sense. So if the city was to build it, it would be like the city's water line. We have a contractor or subdivision comes in, the subdivision builds the water line, the storm drain, the sewer infrastructure that the city then takes ownership of when the subdivision is approved. And now we're on the hook to own, maintain, repair, replace that infrastructure. If we were to do our own fiber system, we would own it and we would be responsible for all those things. We may choose, as Dave said, to get a third party to come in because we don't have the expertise or personnel to actually make the repairs. However, one of the pros, but if the city owns it, the city would then reap the benefits of the pay system. We would make the profits. These others, you pay into it. Even when the bond's paid off, they're still paying that base cost. It's just going to someone else. But that's part of the risk reward. They're taking the risk, they're going to get the reward.
Another example, just to make connections mentally, is power, right? There are some cities that own and operate their own power utility and other power company, essentially, and others that have a contractor do that, Rocky Mountain Power. And it's a similar type of conversation of, does the city want to be in the internet business, in the network business, where those cities that decided to be in the power business at one point, to treat that as a utility. And so that's another kind of connection, at least mentally for me, to see the idea of the risk reward. One thing we haven't said is there's a cost to putting in the actual physical network in the ground, right? That's the capital cost, the bonding cost we've talked about. There's also the monthly bill to the internet service provider, but also to the network owner. And so if we hand that off to somebody, to a company where they are the owner and operator, they have to put up the capital outlay to put in the infrastructure. But then once they have the subscribers and they pay off all of that infrastructure, well, then there's money that is coming to them. Of course, if they don't get enough subscribers, then there's the risk that they put out all of that money financially and don't have the revenue on the backside. So again, that's the risk reward that we talk about, is that separation of putting the money up front to get the network going and those capital costs, And then does the subscriber model or utility model pay for that and make it so there is actual revenue to support the ongoing OOM&R to ours?
Yeah, the fact that we got 6 requests for information suggests to me that each of these companies feel that fiber to the premises in this community has a low risk to them. They're willing to come forth, however that model is for them, but that there is a need or an interest in this community. So that's what I've taken away from that. There is that desire. So it's worth the risk to them to put the infrastructure in the ground because they think there's a profit in it down the road.
But I mean, I think that's without getting again into the weeds of everything and how it works and how it functions. Should we be facilitating that fiber into the ground or for the city? Whether it's a utility model, a consumer model, or whatever that is. I mean, that's what we came back to every time we spun around and talked about all the details of all of these proposals. But then we came back to is, well, what are we willing to commit the city to? And that leads you down a whole different path with each different provider. It eliminates some, it, brings some back in. And I mean, you had some providers that are willing to do the whole gamut of it, whether it be we own it, they service it. And so it just goes totally different on how we approach the providers and who those providers are.
Knowing what our budgets are at our city and they're not overflowing, I feel like it wouldn't be very wise of us to get a system where it's a utility system that the city has to maintain and operate. Recognizing that there is a reward there, but also recognizing that we simply don't have the capital, the manpower, anything like that to make that happen. So should the city facilitate it? I think it would be beneficial, but I would lean more towards a subscriber model. Because in reality, we're already paying internet for somebody else to make money off of their infrastructure anyways. It would be no different than what we're all doing right now.
Anyone else want to?
I think of when people in the city complain about their water usage and, a single person not using as much water as a family, and they have a hard time with that. And I think this is similar. I think, people who don't use this are not going to want to pay for somebody else who is.
Right. So, good point.
That's a
Thank
good
you,
point.
Michelle.
Yeah, I was actually kind of having the same considerations of those in the city that I can just think up off the top of my head that would highly benefit from this, who live in areas where the internet is not very reliable, where they have kids at home that are schooling, especially this last year, that was really, really frustrating for them. On the flip side, I also can think of a whole section of people who would not need this, who would not want this, most of which are people who are on fixed incomes. If I can generalize there. And so it's really difficult for me to decide here, because I feel like in a way it's hard to say yes or no here, because either the conversation continues or it dies here. And I don't know that we should do that without public input. I think the public should have the ability, before we say yes or no, I think we should ask our public, hey, what do you guys want? Because I've heard very passionate arguments on both sides. I have no idea where the dial is, if it's 50-50 or, gosh, I think it was like 49.7 to 50.3 in Kaysville. I mean, it was really, really close. Or if it's more 70-30, but I don't know that I feel comfortable making that decisions without letting the public weigh in first on whether they want this to be considered a utility or not. you know, I think of my hometown where I grew up. This was a very similar discussion, but with sewer. And whether the city should provide sewer, whether that should be considered a utility or not. I'm sure once upon a time it was the same with water, and whether we should have our wells or whether we should have the city pay with utility with water. So I feel like this is something that has approached cities in the past as whether or not this is considered a utility. The internet is a huge facet of our life. And so I think we really need to sit and think of whether that is something a municipality should offer to the public or not. But I don't want to make that choice without hearing from my public first.
Well, I think we all want to hear from the public, but what's your knee-jerk reaction here after you've thought about this? Maybe not knee-jerk, but thinking about the subscriber versus the other model, what would you lean more toward?
So I guess I'm wondering is the question whether we're looking into subscriber and utility, or are we looking into whether we should facilitate this at all?
That's the first question.
Okay, so that's what I'm leaning back to.
Facilitate question.
Back to the facilitate question. I just don't know that I want to put an end to that before we go into the different subscriber utilities.
I don't know that anyone here's saying put an end to it, though. That's what, I mean, if the council's already saying, yes, we should, which I'm saying, yes, we should. I think Angie just said, yes, we should, and so is Wayne.
Yeah.
We're not putting an end to it. Then we're going to kind of broaden our discussion that we have something more to present to the public.
Okay,
We do feel like we need to facilitate something, but what is that something?
okay, I misunderstood. I
And
thought you
so, no,
said
I
if
mean,
we-
unless you're going to say no,
Mm-mm.
then it's not a no from the council. And maybe Joe doesn't want to. She hasn't spoke her mind yet, but, but that, I mean, and that's kind of, I don't think it's going to get squashed because I think, but we all need to kind of agree that that is something we want to keep moving down the road. If it was a no, then maybe we do open up the public and and the public changes our mind. But
Okay.
I don't
I
think it's a no.
misunderstood. I thought when you said that it should be a private thing and not a city facilitate, that
No,
the
I mean,
discussion would die,
It can
but
be
that's what I thought.
facilitated, but I don't, there's different things on consumer-based models, you can facilitate, we can facilitate that and encourage
Yes,
it to go
I
into our
understand.
city. And that's what I would be leaning towards personally,
Okay.
but because I have my reasons, but I don't think we should be, because other than school, you have a tough time for me to say, I need to provide something for someone's home office. I mean, that's their problem. That's their work. I provide it for my office.
Yeah.
And so I, other than the school things with the restrictions we've been under, that makes a big difference. But to watch Disney Plus in every room, I could care less. You know, and so yeah, you're getting more of my opinion now, but that's kind of where I'm headed with. my
No, and
discussion.
I feel the same,
Yeah.
very, very closely. I misunderstood what the question was, so I apologize for that. Yes, I think we should absolutely look into these options.
From my perspective, the fact that we even went out for a request for information suggests the city is willing to facilitate
Right.
something. Now that we have something, that it's like, okay, which direction we want to go? And I think to Haley's point, that's where getting the public to come in and say, yeah, I think we want to do a subscriber model, but don't you put any money in the kitty? Or no, I think you need to do a subscriber model and you need to back it up with whatever that might be. That's what I want to hear from the public rather than invoke my own, opinion, just to hear where they're at. That's what I mean by facilitating. I think we need to move it forward before we can select any of these. And these RFIs are only good for a certain time period, in which case, we may have to go back, and that's like 6 months. So it's not, we can't sit on this forever, but I think if we got some public involvement, how we get the public involvement, that's the next question. How do we do that? I have some ideas that way, but I think that's the core question, utility or subscriber. And my personal opinion, like Angie shared her personal opinion, I think it's a subscriber model. That's where I'm leaning. But if the public comes back and says, no, it should be a utility model and everyone should pay into it, I need to take that into consideration as well. And I can be swayed, but that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Can I ask a question just based on the survey results that we already have in hand that leaned heavily to subscriber?
It did.
Do we need to ask that question?
I still think so.
Well, they didn't ask the other option, did
We
they?
didn't ask if they're okay with a utility model.
No, we didn't.
Okay.
And the reason I'm kind of curious, because I think if it ends up going, you get 20 or 30, whatever it is, to come in and tell us they want a or a utility model, then you're almost going back to where Kaysville just was, because how do you almost have to have a vote on a utility model before we go bond for this kind of money. I mean, you look at what else the needs of the city are,
Right.
that we are gonna have to bond for in the next 10 years.
And that's a good point. We really don't have a good handle as to if the city was to build its own infrastructure, what that cost is.
Yeah,
The gamut or the range of that cost is, take a dartboard and throw it at the wall and you're gonna be close. That's,
I think that's why some of those had a blank, right? They had so many options there of city ownership, company ownership, whatnot. They didn't put a number there because that's dependent on some of those other elements.
it could be as low as 6 million. It could be as much, well, we had 45 million in there for the one option, which, okay. But yeah, we've heard numbers all over the place as a committee and those who introduced. So that's, we can't answer that question in public, how much. It's like, it's expensive. I think that's how he answered. It's a lot of money. And it would definitely have to be bonded for. And that bond's at least a 20, possibly a 30-year window that would obligate if we were to bond on our own, if we were to do it that way. But those are the type of things that the public would need to understand when they weighed in. How we get to public comment is, I'm going to move on unless you want to.
I have just one quick question, if I may. So just to help us better understand, in the case of Kaysville, where they did on the ballot as more of a utility option, do the residents still have the option of doing a subscriber option, or how does that play out for
Yeah,
them?
so
at this point
Kaysville
in
had
time?
to entirely reset at that point
Okay.
and figure out where they were going to go. My understanding is that, and I haven't had a conversation recently about this, so this is perhaps old information. But my understanding is that they now have had to go with more of the private sector providing it to whoever they are going to provide it to.
Okay, thank you.
Just for clarification, Kaysville wasn't solely utility model. They actually had an option. It was kind of a hybrid.
They presented a
have
couple
to-
of options prior to the vote, and then they had to just put one opinion question on the ballot.
Right. You didn't have to pay. They were going to run fiber to every home, but then if you didn't want to connect, you didn't pay.
Yeah, they created a little bit of a hybrid.
Okay,
I just feel like if we don't pursue this is something that, I mean, if I want to get fiber to my home, I can't just be like, hey, come install it in my house. This is something that we really need to help our residents, because I think we're all understanding that there are residents who would like this service and are willing to pay for this service, but they can't go out and get it on their own.
Right.
So for us to just open the door for that and make that happen for them, it makes sense to me if they're willing to pay for it, let them pay for it.
One thing to consider on public outreach is you're going to get a lot of feedback. I think as a council, you might just have to prepare for it. At the end of the day, you're going to have to make the best judgment call, because a lot of the residents in previous experience of doing public outreach for fiber, a lot of them came back as, we don't care how the sausage gets made, just give us fiber right now. Right. And so I think at that point, it draws back to your powers as trustees for the residents to make that decision. So I think public outreach is a great tool, and we can come with strategies to do that. But I think just past experience, you're going to get a lot of information of, just do it, please. I don't care how. and I think that's just something to prepare for.
thank you.
Trevor, building upon that, do you have any suggestions as to first steps on the public outreach? Would it be a public comment period on just this agenda item? Or would it be a form they fill out on the city's website, or a combination thereof? Is there several tenets to it?
We can do that. I think a forum or public comment might have a small impact. You'll get the 10% that pay attention and care, right? I think we can do a survey model to kind of explain that a little bit more. It is a little, I mean, Dave spent 22 minutes explaining it at the beginning of it, so it is a little bit nuanced. So that data might not be completely represented, because it may not be understood completely. But I think a survey public input that way is a great place to start. If we wanted to do open house or you know, even a Facebook Live digital open house type thing to have people ask questions, kind of guide a conversation, that might be a good, because a lot of it is education at this point to help them understand the options, so that they can give valuable feedback.
So what I'm hearing you say is this is a trade-off now, or a baton handoff between the Municipal Utilities Committee and the PR Committee to take this to the next level, right?
I don't think it's a trade-off. I think it's a hand-holding.
Handoff.
With the
One-
survey, is there a way, I know in surveys in the past, I think, I can't remember, maybe our park survey was that way, where they took random samples from the community instead of just allowing people to just go on and fill them out. And would that be appropriate for this type of thing? Because you're going to get the people that really want it, you know, but then the ones that don't care or don't know might
So-
not.
So you've hinted at a really important piece of statistics and the idea of a random sample versus self-selection. And I think we just need to determine as a city which gives us the data that we're looking for. Because on one hand, a scientifically accurate sample that is randomly selected gives us a broad scope of what the general populace might think. But you also said those that care might respond. And if those that care respond, and that's a high enough number of those that care, maybe you hit that take rate. And getting self-selected data might be valuable in that case. So I think we would just have to consider which methodology gets us what we want. Typically, random sample data is a better process for gathering statistically significant data than self-selection data. Self-selection data has inherent bias in it, where random sample process is a better cross-section of the community, and you can make broader assessment based on random sample than you can self-selection.
But with random sample, you do tend to run the risk of not having a high return rate on those, unless we are going physically and knocking doors. It would be, you know, sending a survey out in the mail, following up with that survey. You know, there would be some hindrance to get a truly scientific sample. So if your sample is large enough on an opportunity side and on the convenience sample, sometimes you can disseminate some good information from that. But yeah, those are just some pros and cons to both of them.
All right.
So can I be devil's advocate for just a minute? Okay. Let's paint a picture here. So we originally brought this up. If you recall, a resident contacted me and said, why do we not have fiber? And I brought it up, and Dave made a meeting with Utopia. That's how this originally started a few years ago, right? That started the discussion of fiber in the city. So we had people approach us a couple years ago about that. We have kind of discussed here that it affects our bonding power if we do it a utility model. We don't know how we're going to pay for it. We don't know how much it is, like Wayne said, to the dartboard. So we've already posed the question, if we did this model, utility model, or excuse me, subscriber model, would you be willing to participate? And people said yes. If we reach out to the public again, are we just going back again a year and saying the same thing to them? If we all feel like the utility model truly would not make sense for our city.
I mean, I would agree that, I mean, we have asked this question specifically, would you be willing to do a subscriber model? I just don't know that we've asked the question specifically about the utility side of it, but yeah, I would agree. I don't see us going down the utility model route.
Because I mean, logistically speaking here, we get all this feedback and we have, let's say it's just like Hayesville and it's 50-50 and people are like, yes, I want this utility and I absolutely want to pay for this whether my neighbor wants to or not. and you have people who say, no, I don't want to pay for this, let my neighbor pay for it. At the end of the day, we get this data, and then do we all say, well, we can't afford a utility model anyways, so let's just get a subscriber model, and we've wasted all that time?
Well, I mean, let me put it.
Again, devil's
I-
advocate, I'm just saying.
I agree. If it did come back and everybody was for the utility model, so everybody had access, those who wanted higher could pay for higher, you're going to make the decision, are you willing to risk that we're going to get a 34.4% take rate? And then there is no money out of the city's pocket, which everybody has said they do feel like we would get a take rate of at least that or higher. I mean, even the ones who are talking about us owning it, everybody's saying that 34, 35 to 40% was not a hard thing to hit with most areas. And isn't that kind of the feedback we got from most of them? But they're also selling a product too. So they're going to maybe tell us what we want to hear. But, I mean, that's the,
Well, 700 homes would be just about just the West End, right?
well, and right now, I mean, if you go to let me throw this out. If you go to the subscriber model, you look at how many homes are being built right now in little subdivisions, those areas, they're probably going to go in first. They're going to go in instantly if the subdivision, am I not correct? I mean, we already had them ask us what subdivisions were going in, and they would go run that in there now, and it would be in there. That would be, the West End would probably get it first when it comes to that, because that's the
Well, that
play.
would
It's
also
easy for them.
Give
while
our
they're-
take rate.
Yeah,
same
and so
time.
your take rate starts to happen, but, and they have designated other areas that are easier for them to get it sooner. It'll have to go in groups or pods or however, no matter which way we do it. So, yeah, Angie, I'm on the same page you are in a way that, I mean, if we're all leaning towards, but if we, maybe the public will convince us otherwise if we want to ask the question and just have them come in and talk to us, but I don't know. I don't want to kick this down the road another year or 2 years either.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we need
Yeah,
to
that's
make a
my
decision.
point. That's my
And is
point.
the survey process going to be a 6-month process?
No way.
We might
Can I,
No, I'm not for that. We don't want to have a 6-month.
Well, yeah, I
process.
agree with you. I
Yeah.
just don't want to keep kicking it down the road.
another thought that I just had based on watching other cities go through this. People that are okay with a utility model are generally also okay with a subscriber model. People that are okay with a subscriber may or may not be okay with the utility. But by selecting a subscriber model, you're not harming anybody that doesn't want it.
Mhm.
And that's, I think, where there's been controversy or difference of opinion on the utility model is there are people that are essentially being told you're going to get a level of service, whether you want it or not. But that argument is taken away in a subscriber model entirely.
To give a little point of reference, I live in Clearfield City. They just switched over to the Utopia subscriber model. They're about halfway done with their build out for the city. Half of the city is greenlit, and they're fairly close to their take rate already.
Didn't you just get yours like last week?
So I had to be put on a wait list for a month to get mine. So I get mine in October. But they when I talked to them on the phone, they said we're installing them everywhere and as fast as we can. And
I know we're not making decisions tonight, Wayne, but I'm going to keep going down this road for just a second. So, I mean, if we all agree we should facilitate it and we all kind of are leaning towards a subscriber model, but then it gets into the next big question, and it's ownership. And that leads to the root of kind of do we want those layers? Do we want all of that stuff? I mean, if we're a subscriber model with no ownership, that really leads us down the path of getting franchise agreements and facilitating companies to come in here in a free market system and bringing it to our community. New subdivisions and areas they can get it to, it wouldn't be this cover the blanket city all, on a schedule. And that would be, again, what I would be leaning towards in that, but we're facilitating it to get it in here so it is an option. It may take us several years for them to do that, but that would be, but again, do we want that to be a public discussion?
Yeah, just to maybe spin it just a little differently, Blair, there's really, the utility model, no, excuse me, the subscriber model, as you talked about. But this, and the city doesn't take ownership. It's not just necessarily a franchise agreement. If you do a franchise agreement, then it's on their time frame and they become fiber hoods based upon where the demand is, and it slowly grows and it'll take a longer time to
Exactly.
to do. But the other half of that is the Utopia one that I wrote, just to know a name out there. They are a private. They would be a subscriber model. The only difference is rather than a franchise agreement where the city's not putting any backing or money into it, they want a city bond to back them. Supposedly a no obligation bond unless it goes below 34%, and then we're on the hook during that 27 years. And that's that risk reward aspect. So that one would be quicker with regards to, that would be quicker in its installation. But there is that risk that there might be a financial obligation. And that's what I've heard from the public is, yeah, I would like it, but I don't want the city to put up any money for it. So that's going to be the risk reward is, do you want it? Do you want it fast? We may have to back it up with a bond. Or if you want it, but you don't care how fast it comes in, then let the private companies come in and it'll be on their timetable.
So I just have another question regarding, there has been some cities, Morgan comes to mind, and I wish I could remember all the details better. Perhaps somebody here does, but because I believe because their take rate was so high, they were actually able to pay that bond off in about 5 years. Have you looked at, is that?
Well, what the Utopias told us, they might perceivably pay off the bond early. Well, you may have a higher take rate, but you don't pay, Haley, you may have a higher take rate than what they require. You could have 80% of the city flip over to it. You can't pay off your bond any faster. They take those monies to go to the additional capital costs to get the rest of the community built. The bond is the bond. It's a 25-year bond that starts 2 years in. So it's actually a 27-year bond.
Gotcha.
And you're paying on that bond for 27 years, which means you have to have that take rate for 27 years, or the difference, the net difference is obligated by the city to back it up, those payments. The idea is, once people are on it, they're going to stay on it. We can always go down the road of, well, if we think we're going to be close, then if people sell their house, and we can go to the, well, I'm not going to say that termination agreement, but you can't terminate. So the resident signs up, and that resident is always there, and they're always on the hook to pay that payment. And we can have a secondary agreement, but that kills the idea. There's some other cities who tried to do that, and it basically squashes it. People are willing to, city, go ahead and bond for it, but we don't want to have to obligate our property for that payment for 27 years after we move. They want the city to be able to back it, and that's part of the risk reward with that bonding aspect. But if we think the city's going to have a 45, 50%, and that margin from 34 to wherever we get is great, then the risk is less and less the farther we get people to subscribe. But that's up to the interest of the public. And that's really what we're coming down to. Do we bond it and then go to the one company, or do you do a franchise agreement, let the private companies come in? That's the decision point, I think.
I think so. And just knowing all our public hearings we've had with anything property tax related, it's really hard for me to commit the city to spending X amount of money that we don't even know how much it is for this utility. I have a hard time seeing a lot of people saying, yeah, please raise my utility bill. Because they're paying for it somewhere else. I love the idea. I know we're not making decisions. I'm just telling you, I love the idea of Utopia and having that come in all to the city within a quick time frame. But to have us on the hook for 27 years is not appealing, even if we don't have to do anything with that.
From a process standpoint, throwing out an idea to the council, based on what I'm hearing of a general agreement to be involved in some way, facilitate in some way, a general feel of subscriber model versus utility, not wanting to do utility, but willing to look at options with subscriber. In some ways, those two answers, or those two questions and answers, narrow down the list of provider options. Would you be interested in inviting the providers that still are an option to come in and maybe answer some of these questions in a meeting?
That would be like the interview process. It's the
Essentially.
next step of the RFI, and that would narrow it down and help us make that decision.
And I would agree with that, and you would probably get a lot more public input at that time too.
You could ask some of these specific questions that we have about, for example, Utopia and the bonding and the timing. And if we get a higher take rate, what does that look like? Some of the other companies that are more of the franchise agreement idea, what's the level of obligation that the city's required? What is the cost that we're looking at? What's the timeline if the city encourages you but is not financially supportive of you? Some of those types of questions could be asked in that type of an interview setting and get more specific responses from those entities.
I like that idea. Would there be, should we do that for a work session? How does the council feel about doing another work session next month? Possibly having that.
At the latest, I think, yes, we need to do another work session. We can have a fourth Tuesday of this month, or if we have a light agenda, we can add it to the back of a regular agenda meeting. But I think it's something we need to follow up with the next 2 to 4 weeks, definitely.
I would agree. The sooner the better, just so we can, one, I do think the council though ought to be provided with the proposals so they can review all the details. I think you'll see a lot, there's a few things that you'll see in each different proposal. And, you know, in the part of the packet, well, I mean, do we want those to be part of a packet?
No, we can't.
We can't do
No.
that, can we?
Mm.
I mean, because it's, I mean, I didn't know half of the stuff about fiber. It's hard to, I'm just trying to think, because it would benefit the council to review them independently, so they should be at least provided with them to review
Well,
before the meeting.
we can send all of the responses to the council so that you can see all of that. Again, but based on the decision or the feelings tonight, that narrows down who can provide, and we can just reach out to those that provide and see if they can come to a future meeting here.
Okay.
My first thought would be to put that on our next city council agenda, which is the second Tuesday in October. Because we wouldn't be able to get them next Tuesday necessarily. Because that's all going out today or soon. So
Unless we wanted to have a special meeting on October 5th, which is the first Tuesday, we can do a work session on October 5th.
And this is bad because it drags us out. Do we want them all three to provide, or if it's three or whoever, to provide at the same meeting? Or to give a presentation at the same meeting? It's kind of I mean, I don't know what, if it'd be good or bad.
Just put them a half hour apart or 45
I mean-
minutes apart so they're not overlapping, seeing each
Get a
other.
rest.
I think these companies are very familiar with each other. I don't think it would be a problem to have them hear each other's answers personally.
Okay.
I
And we
think
can
you
give them a
might get
time
some
limit.
additional information from them when they know what the others are saying.
So
They're
do we
probably
want-
watching tonight. I
the
wouldn't be
fifth?
surprised.
I'm sure
Yeah,
we have
they-
some watching
I know
tonight.
that Utopia reached out to us recently.
Hmm. Probably driving
The
them
5th
crazy.
or the 12th? Do you guys want to call a special meeting, or should we just put it on our October 12th meeting?
I know I will be out of town at the ICMA annual conference on the
which
5th,
day?
On the 5th?
on October 5th. Not that I have to be here. I think you can handle this just fine without me.
I'm okay with either date.
Anyone else?
I'd almost rather have it be its own thing, on its own meeting,
I agree. yeah.
depending on how much information and if we can hold them to a time frame. I would really hate to have another 10 o'clock meeting because fiber internet discussion took another hour and a half. I can do either. I am flexible. I will do either.
Okay. So you would prefer the 5th, but you're flexible.
Yep.
Okay, anyone else?
Either way.
Yeah, I prefer the 5th, but I could do either. I just think if we try to attach it to the 12th, then you put them at the end or the beginning. You have no idea when it's gonna open up for them. If you put it at the beginning, then you'd have to have a time limit so we could get to our real business.
It might not be bad to have a time limit. I don't know. Wayne, do you have a preference?
I'll do either, but I would say it should stand alone meeting, so I would go for the 5th. And I also think we need to prepare some instructions for each as to what we're expecting them to bring. If it's a stand here and answer questions, or if we want them to do a small presentation and hear the points we want them to address in that presentation, so that they're all given the same objective, purpose of why they're presenting. And then, know that there'll be a Q&A at the end. And then telegraph to them if they're all going to be in the same room at the same time, or if it's going to be individual. I mean, I'm open. I'd prefer to have them all in the same room and flip of the coin as to who goes first, second and third. But give them the rules in which we're expecting them to present on. And if the council has specific questions or specific points they would like to have addressed, now would be the time to give that to staff so we can make sure that's part of that syllabus.
Did you want to solicit questions from the residents as well as part of the outreach?
I think we need to get, whatever we're going to get to them needs to be timely, like this week,
Yeah.
so that they have a week and a half to prepare. And that's cut it kind of quick. So I don't know if we have that kind of time to get the resident questions, but I'm listening to what the council has to say on that.
I mean, how would we get those questions?
I mean, we could give them a time frame. You have a week to submit your questions, either direct message us on social media or send a public comment in, or.
Yeah, I think that wouldn't hurt to reach out and try to solicit questions.
So these would be questions that we would ask at the meeting, not necessarily have them prepare answers in their presentation.
Yeah,
Right.
Okay.
they've probably been hit with almost every question anyway.
I think it may, if we have public involvement that night, it may help keep that conversation on track, so there's not a lot of public discourse that night. Does that make sense? And if the residents still feel like they have an opportunity to ask their questions to them.
This would be a work meeting, correct? And so we wouldn't have a regular public comment or.
I think we leave the public comment for the time where we're actually going to make a decision or recommendation or a decision as to which one we're going to go with and so forth. I think that's what we leave for the public comment.
Okay,
There may be time to get that in the newsletter as well. And
yeah.
get it just in time to them to know about this meeting prior to, for those that are not online.
Yeah, can you see that Shaylee put something on there?
Yes.
So yeah, let's do October 5th. Everyone's good with that date?
Yes.
Yep.
Except for
Yes.
Dave.
Dave can zoom in.
I can if you'd like me to. I know that
Okay.
you are in capable hands, but
Trevor says he's going to bring dinner for us, so if you come a little early, we'll have dinner before the meeting.
And music.
And music,
of course,
should be fun.
things always improve when I'm not around. I know my role.
So Brandon, do you ever regret not casting your ballot last November?
Oh, I cast my ballot.
I'm just kidding. All right, so let's plan on October 5th then. Is there something else we need to discuss before that? Or does staff, you have your direction?
Yes, thank
Any
you.
other comments or questions from council?
I do. I apologize for coming late.
Uh-huh.
I have no good excuse other than, no good excuse.
Other than that?
But I didn't use the 89 traffic. I thought that'd be a good one.
But you probably covered these, two of the big questions I had. One, Angie mentioned, the 27-year thing just doesn't make sense. Think 27 years ago, what were we dealing with? 27 years from now, what technology are we going to have? That seems ridiculous. But the other thing is, if we were not South Weber and we were just another neighborhood of Layton with all their hills and going down into it, what would the cost be for us to get Utopia or any other things? I mean, because we are a separate city, we start with a blank slate, as opposed to if we were a neighborhood connected to one of the neighboring cities, would the cost be different? I just want to know why we're treated more expensively if we, anyway. Those
So
are-
you're
those
saying
are-
you'd prefer annexation?
Well,
But just from a technical reality standpoint, if we were an extension to Layton,
You're good.
it would not cost the same.
Well, and you know, Quinn, that was actually a discussion we've had because, and we asked it when Utopia came here. Yet we have it now run up this side of us, it's
Yeah.
on this side of us, and it's on this side of us. And yet the price still is the same
Right.
as it, and so that was a question we had in committee. And we have not had a good answer for that, but from what I understand, it's only one company's fiber that's surrounding us right now.
I think the answer relates to political subdivisions, not practical
Exactly.
application.
Right.
So, but that has been a discussion. And it wasn't even a question we asked and did not get a very good answer when we asked that question in council.
Well, I guess we'll have that opportunity again.
Well, maybe. I don't know if there'll be one that gets invited.
I think it'd be good to invite them and let them have, one more shot at it, but I, again, missed all the other earlier discussions, so maybe they're completely off the table.
Think so.
Based on those that provide a subscriber model and have some level of city, how do you say that? Facilitation?
Yeah, it'd be just,
Then yes, I think Utopia is one of the providers that can do that. So we'll confirm that, look at that, based on the RFI responses, and then have those that apply come on the 5th.
Okay. Anything else? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So
Moved.
Okay, we have a
A second.
a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned.